Welcome back to Welsh Miniature Board Gamer, and today I'm going to show you how I paint my Papsikel Colonial Marines. So this one's called Dave Olsen. So first of all, I give it a coat of this blue-grey, just to give it a base coat so it's that sort of colour that I want it to be. And then I'm going to follow it up with this Drakenhof blue, so any sort of blue washed, and I'm going to cover really the miniature in this in its entirety. I don't worry about it going over parts where I don't want to be blue, you know, as long as I make sure that I get everywhere, especially down in the gap between his chest and his arms where he's holding his rifle, because we don't want this being too pale when we come to, you know, paint it up, because that would look a bit odd having this pale colour down in the front of him. So yeah, I'm trying to keep it off the skin, but as you can see, I'm just really splattering this on. So once we'd finished, we got him sort of like this, and ready for the next colours. Now, I generally paint in blocks, so I do the first level of painting first, and then I move on to the next level of painting. So this cork brown, I'm going to be using as kind of my base skin tone for, you know, the arms, the face, which are the only things actually skin tone that you can see on this guy. So yeah. Now I'm getting a fairly good coverage. I am going to have to go over this probably more than once, because I want to get a nice full cover, you know, so it's not going to be bleeding through any of this really pale or dark wash, you know, so that it's a nice thing to work from, etc. Take my time going up to the sleeves, because I don't really want to undo the wash that I've done on his little t-shirt that he's got on his arms. So yeah, get a nice sort of, you know, a couple of coats, get it nice and, you know, blocked in, and so that it's not too transparent. You can see the colour and not really the other colours bleeding through. Now with the face, you have to be quite careful, because obviously he's got the rifle up against the one half of his face, etc. So it's going to be quite obscured, but we're going to try and get as much as we can in. But we want to make sure that we don't get this colour on anything that's not really meant to be on, because it's going to, in the end, it's going to be a bit of a problem trying to reach in if we get the skin colour down in those crevices down in between the rifle and his chest. So we really want to try and make sure that we don't get too much. As you can see, I hit the rifle hit there, but it doesn't really matter. So next we go over to probably one of my favourite colours, reflective green, and we're going to paint all of the armour, so the chest plate, the back plates, shoulder pads, you know, all of that. And we're going to get, again, a nice colour, trying not to hit the bits that we've already done with the wash on, so the uniform, but we're going to, you know, give him a nice coat of this colour. Now it's quite a strong colour, so it should cover up anything with one coat. So yeah, we're not going to worry too much about doing layers of this paint. So as you can see, hitting all of the pads, so his shoulder pads, trying to get this bit on his chest in between the rifle and the and his chest is a bit tricky, but you know, stick with it, because we want that colour to be the correct colour, and not be too pale again. So the rifle, we're going to paint, I'm going to paint it all in this green, and I'll come back afterwards and paint in the metal or the grey of the gun, you know. So we're just going to work it into the whole area for now, and we'll cut it back when we come to the point. Now painting the shin pads, we have to be a little bit careful that we don't get it on the uniform, but there's quite a nice lip, so it shouldn't be too hard, and this is what we got so far. So the bases are the Necromunda bases that you can buy. They're, quite easily to get. That's why I'm using them. So of course remembering to paint the helmet, because that's also a piece of armor, so we need to have that, the green as well. So next we're going to get this blue grey pale, I'm sorry, it's called, and we're going to catch all the raised parts of the uniform. So we're going to cover like 80% of the miniature's uniform in this colour. This is kind of what the base colour is meant to be, and we're going to keep the wash in the recesses, but a little bit more than just the recesses, because it not only gives it this shaded look, but it also gives it a bit of a camo patterning if you go over all the raised parts. And also, yeah, because it's quite a distinct colour from the base tone and the wash, etc., it makes it pop a bit more and does make it look a little bit like you have done combat sort of camo patterning, where we haven't actually, we just picked out the raised details, but it can work for both. So we're going to hit, remember, the sleeves of the t-shirt, and around the neck you can see a little bit of the t-shirt exposed, so you do have to hit those parts too as I'm coming in here, just catching the edges of the t-shirt where it goes down under the armour. So here I am again, coming back in with the skin colour that I was using, just to clean up anything that I might have hit on the arm, and also make sure that I've got a nice base to start from when I put the wash on his skin. So we use this contrast paint, the green Militarium, I think, or something, from Games Workshop. Now this I'm going to slaver over all the green armour plates and weapons and helmets, etc., so that we got some difference in the colour scheme, etc. Now I will be coming back afterwards to knock this back down, because it does make it a rather sort of World War II or the Korean War type colour, which is not quite the colour I want. I want something a little bit more muted than that, but it's going to be good to use as our shadow. Although if you wanted to keep it this colour, I see no reason why you couldn't. It's a perfectly functional colour, and it is a colour that probably would work well as a military colour. It does look like that Korean sort of armour colour, or Vietnam era armour. So then we've got this black grey, which we're going to paint in all of the straps, harnesses, the holster, all of those parts. We're going to go around carefully trying not to hit our uniform, because our uniform is pretty much done here, so we want to try and keep it nice and clean. Just work slowly and methodically. We're also going to hit any sort of armoured sort of, like he's got some a shoulder lamp, so we're going to hit that in this colour. He's got like a knife on his bandolier, rather, not bandana, on his bandolier. So we want to try and hit all of that. That he's also got like this little camera, which we will paint this colour later, but I did miss it this time. We're making sure we get the shoulder lamp. Now, as you can see, my brush is a bit knackered. I got loads of knackered brushes, which I refuse to give up on. So yeah, you'll see me occasionally using really knackered looking brushes, and yeah, that's just me being cheap. So here we're using the Army Painter Flesh Wash, and I love this Flesh Wash. It's really good. Really sort of settles where you want it to settle, but you want to move it around a bit, try and make sure that it doesn't stay everywhere, although I am going to be coming back anyway and painting over this colour, but it's good to have it in the recesses and everywhere, give it a bit of a sort of a uniform colour, etc. So we're going back with the reflective green. And with the reflective green, we're going to be, of course, going back over the armour panels, knocking back that dark green that we've got. So I'm going to go around the rim of his helmet just to bring out that sort of lip that it's got, going around the helmet carefully, trying not to hit anything in the way. And then moving on up to the actual helmet, the dome on the top of his head. So yeah, I'm going to bring it down. I'm going to try and leave a rim. So there's a sort of from the top, you can see the light, and then there's a dark band going around basically before the lip of the helmet, if that makes any sense. Yeah, just to keep some shadow and some variation. So with the panels, I go over each of the panels, hitting sort of 90% of the panel, but leaving the darker wash in the gaps in between each of the plates, and maybe even slightly on the edges of the armour. So it's kind of like a reverse edge highlight. I'm painting all the middle parts of the plates and leaving sort of the very end or the gaps in between. So we have to remember to paint up the shin pads that he's got. Again, sort of hitting the large area plates and, just sort of working it. It doesn't matter if you leave too much of the shadow colour, because it's not going to look bad. Don't worry about it. Just work around, paint around the bits and leave some of the shadows on the details, etc. So then we're going to this, I think that's the neutral grey. Yeah, it looks like a neutral grey. And with this neutral grey, we are going to come back around and paint up. Let me see, what we're painting. Okay, we're going to paint the barrel of the gun, etc. So the bits that I think should be metal, or looking at reference pictures, is metal of the pulse rifle. On my pulse rifles, I have left some of the panels green, which would have been black in the film and all, but I just felt that that's how it should look in on this miniature. So, yes, follow your reference guides, but also, go do your own things occasionally. So I pick up the pads, occasional bits just to give some highlight. Painted that camera on the side of his head. And I've painted, he has this weird little metal plate on the front of his helmet, which I'm going to paint up this grey colour, although later on I do decide to paint it a metallic, because I haven't got any metallics on this miniature, and I felt like it was missing something. Whether that was what it was missing, I don't know, but I decided to go that way. So while I've still got this grey out, I'm going to start filling in a little bit of detail on the base. Now, it's not much, just something to make it, to start getting my job done. And I don't want the base being too busy, this is some sort of industrial complex or some spaceship or something like that by the looks. So I don't want it being too busy and too brightly coloured anyway, but I do want to lay down some colours, so we got some interest on the base. So I'm hitting like the raised areas with this light grey, just to make the panels look a little bit more interesting. So we're going to have this Gravelord Grey Speedwash from Army Painter. I think that's what it was called. So I'm going to hit all the pouches and the weapons, all the things that we did grey before. So the pouches, the weapons, the camera, the light, etc. You know, just all the bits that we did, just to give it a little bit more interest. So this is quite a dark contrast paint, speed paint, whatever you want to call them. So it will make everything look very dark. So we will have to come back and maybe clean it up a little bit. But generally speaking, it looks pretty good, and you know, it's a very quick way of getting some colour difference and some shadow into the miniature. So I kind of use them very much like a wash, the speed paints, just to, you know, give me some dark recesses, etc. It darkens everything up, it does, but you know, I can come back and brighten things up later. So I'm trying to be careful not to get it on the things that we've done our layers on already. So, you know, sticking quite careful. But, you know, with a bit of time, you will pick up your speed regardless of whether you're trying to or not. Speed is something that comes with time. Even if your skill level doesn't feel like it's getting better, your speed will be. So then we go in with this brown sand, so it's a slightly paler colour of sort of that skin tone. And I'm going to hit sort of the raised areas of the arm, etc., the raised parts of the muscles. You know, hitting anything I want to give a little bit of a highlight to, just to make it pop a little bit more. So around the elbows, etc. Of course, the elbow protrudes. So yeah, we're going to hit that part. We'll get the muscles, and we get it kind of to this point here. I'm hitting the bridge of the nose, the tip of the nose, you know, the cheeks, etc. So I stop every now and again to have a good look to see what I think. So I've got some black. I'm going to tidy up the shoes because I messed up a bit of the shoes. I'm going to hit the microphone that he has by his mouth. It's quite a small little detail, so try and be careful you don't hit the face, because our face is looking pretty much done. We will do a bit more, but it's looking pretty good. So at this point, I'm finally getting to his little tactical gloves that he's wearing. So I'm going to paint those black as well. And we'll work our colours up from there. So if you're going for a black to begin with, of course, you have to work up as opposed to working sort of down with shade, etc. I'm putting black into the sort of cavity of the weapon to make it look a little bit more depth to the weapon. So while I've got the black out, I'm going to start doing the rim. I do the rim several times before I finish the project usually. Just whenever I've got black out, I will do that. So this is the black grey, so it's a dark grey. And we're going to come back in with this sort of dark grey and pick out the pouches and the harnesses, etc. again, just to give it a little bit more colour, texture, you know, a little bit more interest than it has. The contrast paint or speed paint has knocked everything a little bit too far back, so we want to bring it back up a little bit, just catching certain details to make them, you know, stand out a little bit more than they would if you just left them with the contrast paint. So we're going to do the gloves here, catching the edges of them. Also the camera on his helmet, the light rig. We're going to try and do sort of a edge highlight. Then we're coming back with this natural grey, which is a paler grey. And this is going to be kind of our highlight colour for any of those sort of grey parts that we have. So along the edge of the barrel, where light might reflect on it, the edges of the lamp, which is going to catch a little bit more light, and things like that. Just make it pop. So you might see me drawing on the back of my hand quite often. That's to try and get some sort of point to this knackered brush that I have, which, yeah, I should be using another one. And it's also to bleach out some of the water that I've got on my brush, so that the paint isn't too thin when I'm doing like lines, etc. So you don't see me dipping my brush in the water very much. I tend to leave my brush quite wet, and that's how I get a lot of the hydration into my paint. I don't generally like mix my paint with a lot of water. I just often have my brush quite damp, and then I'll wipe it on the back of my hand to get some of the moisture out if it feels a bit too wet. It's something that you learn as you carry on painting. So if you're a beginner, don't worry too much about that. Just put a drop of water in your paint, and you should get it nice and wet. So there I'm going back to that blue-grey colour, or pale blue, and I'm going to use that to do the lights and the camera lens, etc. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect, but try not to hit too much of what you've already done, because that might be a bit of a pain to have to try and clean up later. So we're going back to that cork brown, which was our skin colour. And then we're going to grab some of the, what was that one? Brown sand. So that we got sort of a mixture of our two tones, because we want to bring up this colour a bit more. And a pale sand. So this is a real pale one. So this is going to be our final highlight on the skin. Now you don't have to do this point. You don't have to do any of this. This is just the way I paint it. But this is very optional. It does knock up the contrast slightly so you can see it, but obviously when the paint dries you can't see it as much as it seems to be popping here at the moment. He looks like he is a very pale bloke. He's not quite that pale once the paint has dried. So like I always say, don't ever follow someone else's way of painting things. Do it your way, and it'll be more interesting in the long run, because it's your miniature, and you're the one who has to look at these things mostly. Enjoy the process more than the finished result. I always do. I'm never happy with my finished results, but I'm always enjoy the process. So I'm always winning, I think, because I've enjoyed the process. So I'm going to pick out these little parts on the base, giving them some metallic colour, because like I said, it was lacking in some metallics. And yeah, I'm going to chuck some in just on the base, just to make it so it's got some visual interest here. Then I got this sort of browny red colour by Vallejo. And I'm going to just block in these little areas just to give it a splash of colour, something visually interesting on the base, so that it's not completely drab. I don't want it too busy because I don't want it to draw away from my miniature, but I do want some sort of, interest here. So at this point, he's looking kind of good, and he's like 99% done, I would say. So I've come back with that metallic, and like I said, for some reason I've decided to paint the plate on his helmet that metallic colour instead. I'm not sure why I did that. I felt like it needed something to stand out. So then we've got our rust colours. These are the colours that I use. So I use a dark brown, a sort of reddish brown, a yellowish mustardy brown, and an orange. Excuse my dog scratching in the background. And then I'm using a sponge to apply on the base, just to give it some more interest, but nothing too much. I don't want it, again, to take away from the miniature. I just want it to be a, kind of subtle. Now, I'm using too big a piece of sponge. I should have used a smaller piece of sponge and some tweezers to handle it, because my big chunky fingers can't really fit into the miniature between his legs and between his feet rather. And so yeah, I should have used a smaller piece of sponge, but it works, it'll do. You know, I'm not going to be entering this miniature into any competition, so I'm quite happy with it. I do like using sponges for rust effects. I think it works really well. I do dab it every now and again with my finger if it looks like I've laid it down too thick, etc. You can't really see the effect so much here, but you will maybe in the photos at the end of the video. So I start generally from darkest to brightest. So yeah, the orange is my last colour that I will use, and that'll go on top of the darker colours, so that, you know, the newer rust or the older rust is on top, etc. So then I come around and do my black basing again, just to make it pop out a bit more and make it look a little bit cleaner after doing the rust effect. So I'm going to be leaving you with some pictures of the finished miniature. I've hoped this might have helped you in some way. I doubt it. I'm no painting professional. But, you know, let me know and tell me what you think. But until next time, it's going to be goodbye from me, Welsh Miniature Ball Gamer.